Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone in the room and everyone online. We're thrilled you're here. My name is Julia Arnold. I'm with ICRW, the Economic Empowerment and Livelihoods team. We are absolutely delighted today to host Dr. Carla Maenza. Um, she is in the room with us, those of us who are here in Washington, D.C. She is a PhD in lots of really amazing sounding things. It sounds like law and gender, which are two near and dear things to ICRW for sure. She teaches in Spain. Yes.
I used to, yeah.
Awesome. Her main fields of research are gender theory, gendered power dynamics, equality policies, gender mainstreaming, with a special interest in the application of feminist theory in public policy, for which she will be presenting today. She received her law degree from the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina, where I think she hails. You're from Argentina.
Yes.
Cool. And she has practiced law, worked for the city of Buenos Aires in community development, and lectured on constitutional law and legal philosophy in both Spain and Argentina. Wow. So I am super delighted to hand it over to Carla, and we are going to learn all about gender mainstreaming in the EU, which is, I would say, applicable to a lot of other policy actions and opportunities. So, Carla, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be talking about some feminist tensions in equality policies, in particular, the case of gender mainstreaming in the European Union. For those of you who are not familiar with gender mainstreaming, let me briefly explain what it is. It's the integration of gender equality concerns into the analysis and formulation of all policies. Gender mainstreaming has a very broad approach. It has the seed of gender mainstreaming had appeared in the 1985 Nairobi conference, but was later on presented into the world into the 1995 Beijing conference, the fourth World Conference of Women, and has since been on the public sphere, and it has been presented as the lead strategy for gender equality, in particular in the European Union. The European Union presents a very fertile environment to talk about equality policies and feminist equality policies as compared to other developed nations, particularly the US, and that was why it was important for me to understand and analyze the case of gender mainstreaming in a rather fertile environment, as to see which were the causes of why it was working or it was not working, and to see if that the sort of like transplant of policies could be helpful for other cases around the world. So around the world, we see gender mainstreaming in most European countries, in some African countries, in some South American countries, and we can even see it in some legislation in the United States, such as the case of the US National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security of 2016, which is now has been transformed into the Women, Peace and Security Act of 2017. In there, we can see that there's like mention of integrating the perspectives of interest of affected women into conflict prevention activities and strategies. This integration can also be connected to the goal of gender integration or mainstreaming, is to promote gender equality and improve programming and policy outcomes. That is to say, this notion and this idea of making a case for gender analysis in all policy outcomes is even present in some US law. So having presented what gender mainstreaming is, let's go into the case of the European Union. So as I have mentioned, its origins were in the 1995 Fourth World Conference of Women in Beijing, and gender mainstreaming is then introduced as a general recommendation. It said, like, governments and other actors should promote an active and visible policy of mainstreaming a gender perspective in all policies and programs, so that before decisions are taken, an analysis is made of the effects on women and men respectively. So when talking about the European Union, we have to mention two other main equality strategies that were previous to gender mainstreaming. Those are equal treatment and affirmative action or positive action. So gender mainstreaming comes as a strategy of displacement. In its beginning, it meant to target socially constructed gender relations and power mechanisms in all accounts of policy decisions. So compared to equal treatment that did not account for structural inequalities, gender mainstreaming seemed rather avant-garde in 1995. So equal treatment first began in the 1970s. It was aimed at moderating certain symptoms of inequality, and as affirmative action, equal treatment was targeted for women. That is to say, the rationale behind these two strategies was to see how this formal notion of equality was colliding with the access to women to certain positions of power or to certain important positions in society. So taking men as a norm, women had to comply with their deficits. There is no structural inequality analysis into either, or particularly equal treatment, and very little into affirmative action. And it is important to mention that in the case of the European Union, affirmative action had not been very friendly accepted by the European Court of Justice, especially in the 1990s, in spite of legal efforts such as the Treaty of Amsterdam to instate equality as a principle fundamental of the European Union. So gender mainstreaming was projected to generate a structural change in the system of reproduction of inequalities. And that was the aim and the main objective during the late 90s in the European Union. This was meant to be a comprehensive strategy with medium and long-term objectives that would tackle down from the European Union into the member states. But what ended up happening is, I don't want to spoil myself, 25 years after the incorporation of mainstreaming into the European Union, is that we don't see the structural changes that the strategy was supposed to entail. Oh, there. So without further ado, why gender mainstreaming did not work in the European Union? So the answer to this question is probably more complicated than what I'm about to explain to you. And there will be many topics as to why this has not worked, or it hasn't worked as properly, or it hasn't bring the transformative change that it was supposed to bring in the 1990s. But what I'm going to try to briefly mention are like problems in the implementation of gender mainstreaming, to then focus on more structural and basis types of problems that I recognize into attention of two types of feminist discourses. A more liberal feminist discourse based on the self-empowerment of women that responds to economic rationale, and a more post-structuralist or a more avant-gardist or structural type of dynamic that was what the 1995 proposal of gender mainstreaming aimed at. So gender mainstreaming is implemented as soft policy. That is to say, some have mentioned it was like a low-cost strategy. What this means is that without having very high cost or having to implement big chunks of budget into make certain policies changes. This was presented, very well regarded. It was widely acclaimed at the time. So it was a victory for women in the European Union and women lobbyists. So what we can see as that there was like some moderate success in areas that were already having strong feminist discourses. For example, labor law. There was, since the 1970s, 1980s in the European Union, a strong discourse of female empowerment as bringing more people into the workforce. So DJ employment, or what is DJ employment now, has seen the better results into implementation of equality and gender mainstreaming in particular. But what we see is that in other areas in which there wasn't an equality agenda, you don't see those same results. So we can see different types of resistances in the implementation of gender mainstreaming. And I call this the firework effect. There are some input problems that arise from an issue attention cycle. What we can see is that when one type of policy becomes it's very avant-garde and it's very transformative, or seems transformative, it takes a lot of like the attention cycle, and we can see it now. I can make a brief parallelism with the Me Too movement and all of the attention that it's bringing, but we don't see that translates into actual change or actual policy change or actual budget changes. Because what happens is, when you have a lot of attention into one particular subject, in this case, gender equality or gender equity or violence against women, and you see a lot of social power and social movement into changing this, there's a risk, and the risk is not being able to traduce that into policy change. And there's like a generation of a self-conscience that those issues were resolved. What happens in the European Union is that talking about gender equality is thinking about gender mainstreaming, and thinking about gender mainstreaming is thinking about an issue that has been resolved, because gender mainstreaming is there, it's very wide, it's protecting women, it's taking care of a gender type of analysis. But what we do see when implementing this sort of strategy is that there are like technocratization programs, there are like depoliticization problems. Gender equality because of the issue, the attention cycle issues, gender equality loses its political power, political capital. It's not a very sexy, in quoted terms, topic to talk about. So its profit becomes less, it becomes less profitable from a political word. Gender mainstreaming failed in the European Union to make the institutional changes to make the institutional changes into penetrating the different the institutions in the European Union. For instance, the Council of Europe has, since 2012, had a board recommendation for a proposition for a 40% of women in boards act that has not addressed. And I have mentioned the issues with the European Court of Justice in the 90s. So having a lack of a well-defined program means that gender mainstreaming becomes an expert bureaucratic model. That is, actors that are supposed to be neutral are expected to have a gender perspective and are expected to use these tools that are not really established nowhere. So that brings about all kinds of problems, especially when asking who is in charge of taking care of the application of gender mainstreaming. So we have mentioned that there are like little support of the European Commission that this could actually change, because this month a new commissioner was appointed, a female commissioner, Dr. von Leyen. So this could change or not, because what we see is that women appointed into positions of power does not necessarily translate into women having feminist agendas. And I will talk a little bit more about this. So another problem, a big problem in the implementation of gender mainstreaming is its discursive openness. Gender mainstreaming was intended to work as an empty signifier, but its emptiness was so broad that no one actually understands what gender mainstreaming is supposed to do and it's supposed to bring. It ends up being a sort of objective, broad like set of objectives that ends up dissolving into thin air. And let me go back to the metaphor that I was trying to express. There's a danger into gender mainstreaming becoming sort of fireworks that explode, that make a lot of noise, brilliance, that bring about joy, but ends up dissolving into thin air without having anything to grasp. And those are the dangers with every sort of soft type of policy that is implemented. When the implementation ends up being on the hands of people that are of actors, institutions that are structurally against these changes, not a lot can happen. And that was exactly what happened in the European Union with gender mainstreaming, what is happening. Some talk about away streaming as opposed to gender mainstreaming, is because of the evaporation of gender in institutions. And some had said that gender mainstreaming would only work in a gender neutral world that preceded the introduction of gender mainstreaming. So gender mainstream in this train of thought, gender mainstreaming would only work in a world that doesn't have a problem, an equality problem. So as a policy, it seems very useful, but it's not useful if no one actually has the means to apply it. So what I would try to introduce is it's another layer of analysis. I would while studying gender mainstreaming in the European Union, I was asking myself, so is the mainstream ready for gender? Is this a problem of the European Union in itself, or is this a problem of this notion of gender that is, again, very vague and very soft and not explained? So gender mainstreaming is aimed at incorporating a gender perspective into all policy outcomes. So what is a gender perspective? That is something that has never been described or fully explained. So it's very hard to incorporate something that is not, or to quantify or analyze something that it's not quantifiable or definable. So how can this be incorporated with no previous awareness of existing inequalities? It seems that it's meant to be applied as an antibiotic. Like, okay, this is what we have. This is wide spectrum. Let's try it on. So this brings me to two competing models in the European Union of as an economic community or as a social model. These are two contested dimensions that come into the arena And specifically when talking about gender equality, I'm sorry if you can read this, but this talks about gender equality as an instrument, as a means for economic growth and efficiency, opposed to gender equality as a human right. So when you see that these are texts, like documents from the European Union, in which we can see this two competing notions of equality being presented. Equality as an instrument on the one hand, based on economic growth, based on efficiency, based on promoting gender equality as a core activity for the European Union, because it's fundamental for a value and as an objective and as a driver for economic growth. So gender equality is not important in itself, but it's important as a means to economic growth. The tensions that are presented as visualizing equality from these two contesting opinions can be analyzed using a methodology that is called what's the problem represented to be. What I do is analyze European documents in order to see which are the problems that those strategies are trying to solve. And why is this important? This brings about that with every policy proposal, there is a diagnosis of the problem that rests upon culturally influenced presuppositions and assumptions. And that is important to understand the unexamined ways of thinking. We tend to take into consideration all of those pre-written objectives and taken them as a preset value, like gender equality is necessary for economic growth, is necessary for having more people into the workforce, and that is it. But government is a problematizing activity, and we should not be taking this truth for granted. Because when we expose the meaning creation involved in policy design, we can see how these subjects and subjectivities are given shape in discourse. We can see what are the effects imposed on the subjects and the lived effects of the discourse. For example, I mentioned the European Union directive to attain 40% of women in non-executive board member positions in publicly listed companies. So Commissioner von der Leyen has mentioned that she would try to make this directive a reality. But if we take into consideration this directive and we apply this sort of analysis and we try to understand what are the problems that are being solved using these types of strategies, we say that this is a filtered down approach to the issues of women in the workplace. And we can say that because Norway in 2003 had already implemented this type of quotas in non-executive board member positions in publicly listed companies. It was implemented in 2003. It was mandatory in 2006, and by 2008, all public limited companies had at least 40% of women in the boards. So there have been many studies made as to how effective this was for Norway. Again, taken in consideration, Norway is a country in which gender equality, at least gender equality from an index perspective, is better positioned than other countries in the world, and is better positioned than the European Union as a whole. What ended up happening in Norway is that there was no trickle-down effect. It was expected that female involvement in business academies would go up, and in fact, it went down. And there was no convergence in earning trajectories for women in this publicly traded companies. So these types of measures target women of certain class of privilege. There is no intersectional analysis onto how we are affecting women and how we are affecting more vulnerable women of society. There are no structural changes whatsoever, and it's the reproduction of the same narratives with a different color. So again, in these types of propositions, women are presented to be part of the problem. The blame is put on women. We need to change women, or to put women into positions that were previously held by men. So the question is, why are there not enough female board members? Instead of asking, how can we make conditions to make these positions more egalitarian for everyone? How the institutional problems are being framed as important as to the sort of solutions that will be presented. So the rationale behind this economic and employment type of equality is that gender equality is a question of participation in the labor market. It's a question of economic independence, and it's a question of economic growth that can be adjusted if women are integrated in the male-centric force. There's a lot of talk of stereotypes in the European Union documents. Again, consider as a system that limits women's possibilities. So there's also the underlying idea that women should be incentivized to make different choices and to take decisions to adhere to the main norm. So in order to achieve equality, women need to adhere to the main norm. Women are lacking. Women are able assets that needs to be adjusted. And this is like a literal quote. So I already talked about what's the problem represented to be, and why. And this is like a brief conclusion of why this post-gender strategy, or like this structuralist strategy that aimed at tackling gender inequality in an all means and all ways compass, ends up being short, because men keep being the norm. There's still an over-reliance on statistics. Statistics built as to reproduce women as these counterparts of men. So gender is presented as a binary opposition. There's men who are taking up space in the labor markets, and there's women who need to take more space. So how can we make women, this side, more similar to these to the norm that ends up being men? Gender is a noun, it's static. There's no discussion of underlying power relations and this sort of strategies. This is a fixed category that needs to be completed. And it's a number that is supposed to be fixed in almost 150 years. If we come to think of gender as a verb, gendering as a process that is incomplete and evolving and is ever changing, and if we think of gender as a performance, that takes focus away from the independent subject and into the production of the subjectivity in the social practices. So again, what we're seeing in the European Union's implementation of gender mainstreaming is the individualization of problematizations of issues that are present in all society. So the responsibility or the bear or the blame is put on women. So it's driven away from the social to the individual. So it's women that need to be more present in the workforce, women that needs to break the stereotypes. And in this sense, women's empowerment is presented to be the solution to the problem. This is also a commoditization of women, that it's focusing on individual dimensions of power instead of structural dimensions of power. And to see this in a more concrete example, I'm going to present very briefly, because I don't think I have much time, how these issues of over-reliance in statistics and the commoditization of women are presented in education in the European Union. This is a very tricky question because the European Union does not have a lot of education initiatives, because that remains part of the mandates of each member state. But there are some forces into, there are some programs into getting girls into schools, and there are narratives of how to get girls into sciences and math. STEM research is presented as the future of the European Union. So there's like also an increasing will to get girls into STEM research. So again, we see how there's extreme pressure of on girls to getting more individual people into doing this sort of work that translates into more economic advantage. So what we see is that this measurement mentality fails to address the role of education in the own perpetuation of stereotypical gender roles. Again, girls as a group keep being used as a commodity. So we see a very instrumental approach to education. We see phrases like poverty ends with education, or we need to get girls to put the like we have it here: educate the girl, educate the world, educate girls globally, how girls hold themselves back, how can we be together for girls. So again, there's a lot of quantitative goals with no qualitative analysis. And going back to what I mentioned about the firework effect, are these problems going to be solved when girls occupy 50% of all STEM positions? What we see here is that in the European Union, there's something happening with the choices that girls make. Because in an infographic briefing by the European Parliament, there's mention of the inequalities that persist because of the educational choices that girls make, and that care needs to be taken not to ignore the problem of low-performing boys, a phenomenon sometimes overshadowed by the successes of men generally. So in here, what we see is that in these types of problematizations, there's like a pioneers versus laggards binaries that put boys in versus girls, and that in turn is also being prejudicial for girls, because the laggards seem to be the boys instead of the girls, aside from what happened from the successes of men generally. So again, we can see how there's sort of binary thoughts, and how this sort of focuses of only access on our statistics can bring about this sort of counter changes for girls. So how can we articulate these types of analysis into policy? I believe in building bridges between theory and practice. I believe that taking into consideration which are the problematizations that are addressed into this sort of policy strategies are very useful. And taking into account how we categorize, how we name, how we use the words that we are using, we are reinforcing this power structures and this power dynamics. So when designing policies, we need to think about the binaries that are reified and the roles. This is part of my research. This is part of my Ph.D. dissertation. There's a more philosophical part that I chose not to widely introduce because it could be very boring. But if some of you have any questions, I see these tensions from as a feminist debate that needs to happen between liberal feminism and a more post-structural type of feminism, a performative feminism that I believe could be transformative for our policies. And I think that that's a debate that we need to bring into the light. And that's what I try to do with this presentation. I'm way over my time, so thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much. We'll start with some questions in the room, and then we'll facilitate some questions from anyone listening on the web. Dr. Gamage.
So, Dr. Carla, thank you so much. Oh, we need to speak into mics. So thank you so much for sharing this. And you just sort of go straight to the heart of some of the struggles that we have. And I'm looking at our advocacy folk in the room, and I'm thinking about our feminist UN work, where we're sort of trying to do an analysis of how feminist is the UN and what the commitments can be there, and the SG's commitment to gender parity, and yet the ongoing struggle, which is really how do you change the internal labor market and the power dynamics in that internal labor market. And so sort of the issues that are really being struggled with there. And I think that's writ large in other contexts as well. And I think you really put your finger on it when you said the place where we've had the most traction is in labor market, changes, things that deepen and strengthen labor market institutions. And just for a recap, labor market institutions include minimum wages, they include collective bargaining mechanisms, they include legislation around the length of the workday, they include paternity and maternity leave, they include a bunch of things, equal pay for equal work, that really make some substantive difference in the sort of the structural nature of that work environment and the hostility of that work environment for women. And I think the other sort of key policy imperative that we've seen work, and if you start looking across the EU generally, but across countries, broadening out from just the EU, when you invest in care and the right to care and be cared for, you can make a significant difference in some of these other markers of equality in the labor market. So I agree with you that the sort of the gender mainstreaming mandate was a kind of empty mandate because it wasn't really underpinned by budgets and a clear policy agenda. And the one that's had the most traction has been sort of working around labor markets and really looking to enhance rights in the labor market. And I'd love to sort of play that out a bit more in terms of, you did a comparative analysis. I'm assuming that despite your concerns about the limited nature of the statistics we have, that you did look at some of those things and say, actually, we get far better gender equality outcomes in contexts where you've really built those institutions, addressed some of those fundamental inequalities in the workplace. So it was a bit long. Do you want to take several questions? Or?
Yes or no? Like, maybe some might have a same.
Hi, so thank you so very much for your presentation. So my PhD dissertation also focused on gender mainstreaming, but in HIV/AIDS policies in Nigeria. And so I was really excited, to come here to get a different perspective, especially from the European Union. However, what you found in terms of your findings are really very similar to, what I found in mine. And I'm quite surprised because I thought, maybe the European Union would be like, a more egalitarian society, and, you're not going to have those, issues of gender politics or cultural politics and all that stuff. But so it's more like a comment, because for me, I think the major question I really wanted to ask, in light of all the debates around gender mainstreaming, in the literature, was if gender mainstreaming really based on what we are seeing, on the ground, is it a mere rhetoric, right? In terms of all this, blocks that we are having at the level of, institution, right? The polarization between men and women. And I don't know if I missed this part at the beginning of your presentation. I don't know if you talked about, how men and women at the level of policy do construct, gender, and how that might be problematic in terms of, gender mainstreaming. I don't know if the question is clear.
I think those are big ones to tackle.
Yeah, I might see. Yeah, well, so concerning Sarah's question and comments on how to, or the effects of different strategies of care, there are a couple of things that come into mind. Yes, there's been a lot of work and good work made on care, especially into, but that not necessarily translate into, at least in a European level, into care practices. And what I think of, like, what ends up happening with women, and with the introduction of women into this labor markets, is that we see a rise of informal work as well. So what if we take into consideration like a broad like labor analysis from like the 1950s and like the incorporation of women into labor forces, and nowadays we see how the issues of care had not been relegated by women. So again, there's a very strong core cultural reinforcement of women as care workers, and I haven't seen any like strategy that tackles that. Of course, like paternity leave is so important, and we do see that in Sweden, men and women that do take, in some cases, up to 2 years of like paternal and maternal leave have different are presented differently into care. But what we can see also in Sweden is that when dealing with elder care, women are the ones that are also doing, like, putting up with the work. And we do see a lot of women going into informal work. And what we do see again is that in feminine labor, you see the lowest wages. So if you also take that and you put an intersectional lens into that, the numbers go like way down. So of course, it's so important to go for that and to have care analysis and to think of caring as one of the pillars of any feminist like discussion. But I do think that without rethinking or rebranding or readdressing this sort of tensions, we won't see a very effective change. Because again, what ends up being the main driver is, oh no, but women can actually do it better because they're better at this. Yes, because they're women and because they're like 2,000 or more years of like this sort of like cultural. So I don't know if I'm answering to your question in a way, or like.
I feel like you're saying, yes, the claims on duty bearers to invest in care as part of the contribute to the sort of reproduction of care as a feminized issue, and that the sort of in highly segmented labor markets where we don't have the kinds of labor market institutions that mitigate against it, you actually get a reproduction of some of these inequalities even through the investment.
And you see, and thank you for putting it so beautifully. But I just want to add a little thing that, and you do see that in countries in which, like, I come from a Latin American country, so I see this in my everyday, like, well, I'm living here now, but I see this with my everyday people, that when you introduce this sort of discourses in which women are expected to work and expected to have a business life, and in which care is not properly addressed, you see women doing 4 times the work. And another very important thing is that we don't have the numbers of informal work, and informal work is 80% female, like across the globe, and that number goes way up in countries like Argentina. So so I think that's like a dimension of analysis that's very important to tackle, because again, for me, all of this, me being here able to talk to you guys, people, me being able to have a PhD, and me being able to do all these things, I feel myself all these frustrations and impediments, but I have a lot of privileges, and I come from a very privileged background, so I don't have to think of myself to do this sort of things. I need to think of the people that don't have the same type of privilege that I have. And when I take a look and when I do analyze, like, policy should not be written to benefit me. It should be written to benefit the people that are not being able to talk about, what policies say, and like to have 6 years to read all of the European Union documents on equality, or that might mention something that might resemble mainstreaming or equality. So that's something that I try to think of, especially when talking about like labor markets. And I don't know if I should say this, but I'm not an actual expert on labor forces, but from what I've read, I don't know. And concerning your question, so you were trying to think of the polarization of men and women, but I did not get exactly what you were aiming at. If you could maybe sort of yeah.
So in my research, so I think you kind of mentioned, you talked about it a little bit, when I got here. I found out that the way that men and women, constructed gender was quite different. So what was missing was that, structural element, that, thinking about gender in transformative ways. Rather, women thought about gender in the way that, they aspired to sameness as men, without necessarily, thinking about the dynamics, the differences between, men and women. And I found this to be extremely problematic in terms of, how you frame, gender policies, because that really did affect, the kind of programs that were being, proposed. So if you are having, women thinking that, well, we need to focus on women alone, because we are the ones that have the problems, then you're going to be having, such policies or frames of gender, you're going to be having more gender-specific policies. So then it takes away the whole issue of male involvement or even the relationality of gender. So I don't know if you saw same, in your research, with the EU, and if you found this, kind of tensions, right, in the way that men and women, constructed gender, and if you did, how did this, affect the ways that, policies around gender were, put forward?
So let me see if I got you straight.
Okay.
You're talking about women trying to act as okay, great. Okay, great. So yeah, totally. Like when devising this sort of strategies and this sort of policies, I come to find that these are mainly brought up as having men as the norm and having thinking about how to incentivize women into going into the same types of positions and acting in the same way. I don't know if that's yeah, great. So yes, completely. I do think that that is a question of that very easily reproduces this sort of liberal feminist thinking into a debate of access, a debate of having a seat on the table, breaking the glass ceiling, all this sort of metaphors that are used to generate what we're saying, right? There's a standard of how the things are supposed to be, and men are the norm, and this is how it should be. So how can we make this big group of individuals want to go and do the same things and be in the same table? And that is a problem, of course. And I think that's one of the main problems into devising this. So aside from gender mainstreaming trying to be transformative and trying to disrupt this sort of power dynamics and power hierarchies, because when you're saying that we need to put more women into board positions, what we're saying is all power goes to board positions. We need to put more women. We don't care if these women are reproducing the same sort of, and there are like a lot of very good psychological studies made on like very powerful women, or like women that are deemed to be powerful, that end up reproducing oppressive behaviors because they feel as if they need to be one of the boys. And exactly, and if we don't tackle how we are, if we don't go one step back into designing this type of policies and understanding what is the problem that we're representing, how we are addressing this problem, I think that these are all very valid questions from a policy making perspective. And I don't think that those questions are being asked. And going into the more like theoretical part of my dissertation, I do believe I'm making this very small digression, but there's like a sort of understanding into this liberal feminist thinking that women are deprived agency and they need to be given agency. So it's not that you don't want to, but it's like you don't really know that you want to be this and you don't know how to do it. So we're giving you the chance to be on the board. So, okay, well, we're giving you agency. Now you can. And we see this in the documents. Girls wanting to be there. Girls like going into, let me see if I can bring this up. Sorry. There. Because of the educational choices that girls make. So again, it's a question of agency. From a post-structuralist perspective, agency does not come from something that is given to you. It's from the own performative power that you have into changing the narrative that you're doing every day. And I think that I've had a lot of discussions with a lot of people that were not into post-structuralism. I'm, but whatever, it's not a question of like what you're into, but a question of like, oh no, this is too that nothing can change like, what is your answer to this? And I say the answer is right here. Like, agency is on the power of repetition. So if we ask the right questions, if we put into the open all of these tensions and we talk about them like face to face when dealing with policy, because these are debates that are actually happening but are very niche. So this needs to come out. These debates need to come out in the public arena. And I don't know how I had to digress a lot, but like I hope that.
Yeah, thank you. I'll read out a couple of these, and then maybe we'll move back into the queue. Yeah, so from Priya, we have, how effective would gender mainstreaming be to find solution to what is often called the gender penalty, a situation that puts women at a disadvantage simply because they are women?
I don't think that it's very effective. I think that another thing that I didn't mention and I think might be useful to answer this question is that by being so broad, gender mainstreaming lacks the case-by-case analysis that any, from my perspective, good gender strategy must have. So when thinking about gender, like this sort of practices that occur, that requires for a case-by-case analysis. So the answer is like not at all. I don't think that gender mainstreaming deals with.
Okay, I'll do a couple more. From Shelby, what lessons from the EU can be applied to NGOs and civil society, particularly entities that are trying to intentionally move towards more gender transformative approaches in community development and human assistance? And then from Mashal, thank you for your presentation. What role do you think media can play to mainstream the narrative of a working woman as the norm and not necessarily one of a unique story, similar to how this is expected of men?
So concerning the first question about how NGOs can apply this, I would say that it should be analyzed in like a case-by-case because what I come to find is like this sort of understandings are very intertwined into how we think of these problems. So we need to always be checking in as to how we are reproducing this. Thinking into like an NGO, how we reflect the objectives that generally are like just a copy paste or whatever. We're doing this, yeah, let's do it. It sounds nice. This is very avant-garde. This is very out there, and it ends up not being out there enough, or like reproducing this sort of hierarchies. And that's what I've seen. I would have to say, like, and there's a lot, and again, there's a need to try to identify this sort of rationales into everything that comes as a given, because this is everywhere that, and in every policy directive or of text in the European Union. It's in every news article that you read. It's everywhere. So rebuilding the rationales behind what gender equality means and what gender equity is, it's a very hard effort, and it's a day-to-day exercise. I don't know, you're a listening person that asks, but and then about how the media can change this. There's so many things that I should say about this. We are living times of distress in the world, I think. And I do worry a lot about bubbles. So what I come to see is that there are like some very progressive bubbles that don't necessarily track in like a global perspective. And I love the internet and I love the access to information, and I couldn't fantasize like living without it. But there's a lot that we should bear in mind when I don't know if this will be helpful, but I like to watch a lot of daytime TV from Argentina. And I was on the verge of like activating a Twitter account, like at Feminist watches these types of shows, because there's so much that I wanted to say and so many practices that were being reified, but this sort of like non important types of shows. But I do think that the answer could be so like broad that I wouldn't even know where to begin with. But I do think that having this exercise and like incorporating this exercise can be very useful, especially when dealing with like everyday or like activities like watching TV or like talking to a friend or like watching a TV show or reading an article or like Googling online. And when thinking about like Googling online, there's a lot of work on the algorithms of oppression and how this. So that's also very important. Again, I'm no expert on how technology works, but I've read a couple of books and I think that that's like absolute important work to be doing.
Hi, so thanks again for your wonderful presentation. You mentioned something about an over-reliance on statistics, and I would love to just hear your thoughts on that a little bit more, because one of the things that we try to, in general, I know, especially in the development world, thinking about, we got very excited about evidence-based policy making and about like, we can measure impact and we can do RCTs and come up with actual evidence and give the numbers, and we're seeing a trend even from the donors in terms of, yes, we want to see impact and we'd like you to track this and that and this, and so when you talk about this over reliance on statistics, what would be your idea? How would you envision kind of moving past that? Are we measuring the wrong things? Is that what we're measuring? So we're saying 40% women on boards when really we should be looking at the hours spent by minimum wage workers on care, on elder care. So is it that we're measuring the wrong things, or is it that we need to be thinking about like measurement plus? And in that case, it's measurement plus what?
Okay, so there's a lot of things that I need to say. The first one is I am married to an economist. So every time I say this, there's things that happen in the house. So yes, so well, there are like multiple layers to like how to answer this question. Not being an economist, I can say that I don't really trust numbers that much. And I'm really sorry, but that's the truth. And I hope you're listening, whatever. So no, yes, numbers are really important. I'm not trying to say that they're not. I think that it has been a very good argument when talking to my friends as to why I do the type of work that I do. Having said that, I don't think that that could be the only argument used. And what I do think is that there's a danger in this types of over-reliance and this sort of like measurements of impact that ends up being how can we torture the data into showing what we want to show and not having the actual impact? So when you are like running towards having like numbers go up or numbers go down, or like, oh, look, I have this wonderful graph and this is the measurement of what I did, I think there's a really great danger into only thinking in that way. First of all, because I don't know how to use data. So that would make me a person without a job, and I would like to have one. So I'm not saying that measuring is wrong per se. What I'm saying is like, it's not the only thing that we have to aim at. So aside from that, there's a lot of things that are not being able to be measured. And those tend to be the most important things in my perspective. So when you have all this pool of data that does not necessarily incorporate intersection analysis, because you don't have the data, and that's a very valid point of not having the data to do it. But that doesn't mean that this should not be incorporated into your analysis or into your recommendations or into the description of what you're doing, because that ends up erasing this pool of measurable things. And the other danger is like, I once went to, I was organized like a gender meeting. This was this big like gender equality meeting in Berlin for like 1,000 of women from all over Europe that were like exposing what they wanted to, what they were doing. And this was like people, really women from all over Europe. And there was like a Swedish politician, and she very emphatically mentioned the case of Sweden. And this is not something that she only mentioned. There's like a lot of, this is not only the anecdote, there's a lot of research into this, that having women in this, or having parity in power positions that not equally represent having feminist agendas. So what ends up happening is, following this over-reliance on statistics and this rationale that when numbers are fine, everything will be solved. So you have like 55% of women in elected places. So you think that the question of equality is of the past. And then you see that the actual dynamics of politics don't necessarily comply to that. So you need to keep your eyes open. Because what happens when this rationale is installed is that, oh, okay, so this, oh, no, this has been taken care of like 10 years ago. Look, there's like 55% of women. That's okay. Nothing would happen. And it goes so much deeper than that. And she was, and after her presentation, a lot of people had to change their presentations because they all had Sweden as like the example. So I saw like 3 people actively going into changing their presentations. So I don't know if I.
No, you did. I think you kind of addressed your point that numbers aren't everything, but my then is like, so then what do we do to improve this situation? Sorry. How do we, without over relying on numbers, have the numbers in their place, because they do play a role, but then what else can we use, especially thinking about policy making? You can't make policy on a case by case basis. There's too many people.
No.
But how do we
that's no, like, no, case by case does not imply individual by individual.
No, but like even
it's like,
context by context, the policy has to apply to low income and middle income and higher income, especially in a country. Like you're thinking, nope, they're very few, super homogenous, countries.
no,
And so
exactly.
even,
but
right. So then how
no,
do you?
But what I'm saying is a balance between gender mainstreaming and any type of policy, because gender mainstreaming is by definition the antithesis of a case by case scenario, because it's like, okay, well, gender everywhere, analyze, you go, start. Okay, so what are we doing? Who's telling us what to do? I'm doing it by myself. So that's what I mean by case. It's not like individual by individual or like scenario by scenario, but I do believe that having disaggregated policies for low-income people would be very beneficial. And again, about the over-reliance on statistics, I think that incorporating a few caveats might be also be very interesting, because again, what worries me is this, and I might be way too worried, and that's a valid point, but after the fireworks have taken off and they have exploded, I worry about what's left, and the feeling that, oh, that's it. Like, okay, it's the new year, so that's it. And it's not the new year for equality in any way.
Can I just say one thing?
Yeah, sorry.
So a lot of what we do has been, and I'm focused on how do we inject more gender analysis into policy making. And sometimes we have most definitely used the nomenclature of mainstreaming. And, thinking also of how we've engaged with development banks to address whether or not gender is mainstreamed in their policy and mainstreamed in their lending. What's interesting to me is that we end up focusing a lot on process and inputs. And what I like about your critique is that, we're missing the outputs and the outcomes. And so all of this sort of intent and sort of hand waving that we will secure gender equality through gender mainstreaming is not being subject to the kind of scrutiny that you want in terms of the real outcomes. And everyone's got sort of lost in the process and isn't really even using the inadequate data that we have to measure the outcomes in a meaningful way. Is that a good kind of rendition of part of your critique?
Yes, that would be that could be accurate. I also do think that when thinking about like processes and inputs, we are also reifying a lot of the sort of liberal. So it's both way things. It's like, it's not only we're not seeing how this is done and what's the actual impact, whatever problems we might have as to measure impact and all of that aside, but how we change those process. And in many ways, there's like a lot of resistance, because nothing is, oh, well, I didn't realize. There's a lot of interest there. So by bringing to light the power dynamics, I think that that could also be very useful. But by no means I try to pinpoint and like how things should be made, or I just try to build a bridge, as I had mentioned before, between theory and practice, and maybe incorporate some of these tools of analysis into better policy building strategies.
Let me just ask a couple real quick from online. I think you touched a little bit on this already, but from Teresa, did you look at other gender mainstreaming efforts outside of the EU? If so, did you find any successful examples? And the extra part of that question, what would you replace gender mainstreaming with if you view it as less than successful approach? And we have Elena, who asks, what can you suggest in response to your last slide?
Okay. First of all, have I looked into gender mainstreaming in other? Yes, I have. It's not that gender mainstreaming is not successful. It has been successful in and I have mentioned this in places in which there was previously a feminist agenda to work on. So how to measure the success of gender mainstreaming is, again, another issue that's very hard to tackle, because what can we attribute to gender mainstreaming, and what can we say that was what did happen in the European Union? It was like gender mainstreaming started being presented as competition for other equality measures, such as affirmative action. So we do see this, and I didn't incorporate that in the presentation, but we do see less less affirmative actions programs being discontinued because of gender mainstreaming. So I do think that that was a problem. Do I think that gender mainstreaming should be abolished? I don't know. I think that can be improved, certainly, and I do think that that we do need to think into. I chose the European Union because, as I mentioned before, it proved to be a very fertile environment for these types of policies and strategies. But if we see these sorts of outcomes, or like short tools in shortage into its application, I haven't found a lot of course, in the Netherlands and in Norway and in Sweden, there has been better outcomes. But again, like these are countries with a strong history of gender equality measures. So I don't really know. And oh, the other question about the last slide. Oh yes. So there. Oh no. Sorry. There. Should we focus on affirmative action? I do think that in some cases affirmative action has proven to work fine. Again, it's a case-by-case scenario, so I don't want to talk about affirmative action in like broad terms. I think that there's a very good arguments into gender-sensitive education. As the next step, I chose to study education because in every equality document that I came across, there was a mention of education. So I said, okay, since everyone's talking about education, let's see what's going on in education. And then I came to find everything that I already discussed. But there's like a new approach to education from a post-structural gender theory that introduces this sort of gender-sensitive education. There has been some places in the world that have been introducing this sort of strategies. There have been, these are very recent, but they have been met with a lot of resistances by part of the more right-wing agendas that are rising in the world right now.
Can you just quickly do a summary of what gender-sensitive education is for you?
Yes, it's about understanding and not reproducing the types of refined understanding of gender roles. So it's working on gender roles, very briefly and very basically. Yes, from a very early age. So understanding that we live in a world that it's highly genderized, that it's very classist, that it's very, and from a very early age being introduced to how these things, how culturally we are constructed in order to problematize that. So that's it. I think.
Yeah, just real quick. I don't know if anyone else has any questions. You're also getting on Twitter a question, so you might want to start that feminism watching
Okay.
so that people can follow.
Yeah.
But our question is, can you send the link to the paper?
It's a full-on dissertation. I have it here. I will.
It's a book.
Yes. Sorry.
Well,
Long,
this was
not-
absolutely illuminating. Thank you, Carla, for being here in our office and for sharing your wisdom and learnings with all of us. And we look forward to, round 2 of your research and book 2,
Thank you.
volume 2.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, really, we could use it.